DASH Diet Part 2. What is the DASH diet? So DASH stands for Dietary Approaches for Stopping Hypertension. The DASH diet was developed by the National Institute of Health. It is an evidence-based eating plan designed specifically to help treat or prevent high blood pressure. When I say evidence-based, I mean it's been studied, it's been clinically researched, and it's been shown to improve blood pressure. Many studies, in fact, have shown it to have as great an impact on blood pressure, on lowering blood pressure, as medications. So it's been studied, it is clinically proven, it is evidence-based. A few facts about a DASH diet. So it is low in sodium. So sodium is one of those nutritional components that elevates blood pressure. It's low in saturated fats and trans fats as well. And on the flip side of that, the DASH diet is high in other minerals such as potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So these minerals have a positive impact on lowering blood pressure, kind of balancing out the impact that sodium has on blood pressure. DASH diet is also high in fiber and high in healthy quality proteins. Another great thing about the DASH diet is it also reduces the risk for heart disease and diabetes. So when you think back to our discussion on the standard American diet, what we're doing is really significantly cutting back on a lot of those refined foods in the diet and beginning to replace them with high quality whole plant foods, fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, and making better choices within animal proteins as well, more chicken and fish and things of that nature. But in the next slide, we will dive into all the specifics on DASH diet choices. All right, so if I'm trying to adopt DASH diet eating habits, so I should definitely be shifting my focus more to consumption of whole plant foods. So at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables daily, ideally even more than that. Consumption of whole grains. So if we're choosing to eat a grain, whether that's a cereal grain or bread or pasta, it should be the whole version of that grain with all the intact fiber and nutrients versus something that's white, highly refined, and has all the nutrients stripped out. We should include fish and poultry, healthier versions of animal proteins, limiting especially the red meats and processed meats, leaving those for more special occasions. And keeping in mind too with animal proteins, about a 4-ounce serving is appropriate. We should also include vegetable sources of proteins like beans and nuts on a daily basis as well. We should be choosing fat-free or low-fat dairy products versus the full-fat versions of yogurt and milk, for instance. We want to limit high-fat, high-saturated fat foods. So again, this is going to be primarily from your animal sources, your red meats, your processed meats, your eggs, your high-fat dairy, those types of foods. We want to limit or reduce refined foods in the diet. So we can think of that standard American diet image again. So these are going to be foods that are coming out of a box, a bag, or can, again, that have had all the nutrients stripped from them and have had lots of sodium, sugar, and fat added to them. So we want to limit those types of foods. And of course, we want to monitor sodium intake. We want to begin to scrutinize food labels and pay attention to how much sodium we are taking into the body. So let's talk specifically on sodium intake now. So we know that sodium has an impact on elevating the blood pressure. So we generally take in way too much sodium in our standard American diet. So the average American consumes upward of 3,400 milligrams of sodium per day. And that's just the average American. Many of us are consuming way beyond that and easily double what we should take in. So the DASH diet limits intake of sodium to about 2,300 milligrams per day. And that's meeting levels of the dietary guidelines for Americans. And that represents roughly 1 teaspoon of table salt. There's also a lower sodium DASH diet version that limits sodium to 1,500 milligrams or less per day. Again, DASH diet protocol, limiting sodium is very important. Again, that sodium intake in the diet can absolutely elevate blood pressure. So we know that sodium intake can certainly elevate blood pressure over time, but how do we go about reducing the sodium in our diet? One of the biggest factors is beginning to limit or reduce the amount of refined processed foods in the diet. Again, anytime food is processed, it has lots of sodium added to it as a preservative and a flavor enhancer. So if we can begin to cut back on those types of foods, if we can think of those standard American diet types of foods, those refined sweets, refined grains. So this could be snack foods, this could be cereal grains, this could be sweets. Those types of foods have a lot of added sodium. We could begin to season more with herbs and spices and not rely so much on the salt shaker to season foods. We can use a salt substitute at home. Think of Mrs. Dash, for instance, is one of those that uses a potassium salt instead of a sodium salt. So when we do that, we limit the amount of sodium that can be added to foods. We can limit or skip some of the sauces and condiments. Those food options, sauces especially, have a lot of sodium added to them. And even ketchup and mustard, for instance, we don't tend to think of the sodium content in those condiments, but they have lots of sodium in them. We can begin to read and scrutinize food and nutrition labels. Even if we're choosing processed foods, chances are there's a much better option that has reduced sodium content, and we can select those instead of the full sodium content. And we can choose fruits and vegetables as side dishes first before something that might be more processed that has more sodium content. So let's talk about the sodium content in common refined foods. This can begin to paint a picture of why we want to limit these foods if we're trying to improve blood pressure. And keep in mind that the recommendation anyway is to consume less than 2,500 milligrams of sodium per day. So looking at common foods like a frozen pizza, for instance, 800 to 900 milligrams of sodium per serving. Keep in mind, a serving size of frozen pizza might be as little as 2 slices, so we're probably going to eat much more than that. Pasta sauce, 600 to 750 milligrams of sodium in a half a cup. Again, our portion, our serving size is going to be probably at least twice that. Canned soup, as much as 800 milligrams of sodium in a cup. One of those decent sized cans of soup usually has 2 servings. Lunch meats, serving size is 2 ounces. That's 500 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. We're probably going to consume much more than that. Breads and bagels, for instance, 200 to 400 milligrams of sodium per serving. That's 1 slice of bread or half of a bagel usually. Any boxed or frozen meals, we rely on those for their convenience, but they also have a lot of sodium, 500 to 600 milligrams of sodium per cup. We're generally consuming probably at least twice that. Fast food meal, 1 meal, 1,300 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium. And a sit-down restaurant meal, as much as 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So certainly when you see numbers like these, cutting back on refined foods is a great way to limit the sodium content in your diet. So let's shift focus now and talk about exercise. So exercise has a great impact on lowering blood pressure, especially cardiovascular exercise. When we do exercise, we're conditioning the heart to beat more efficiently, so it beats with less force. We also improve the elasticity of blood vessels. So these things together actually lower blood pressure over time. So it's recommended to get at least 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity physical activity. This could be something as simple as getting out and doing brisk walking and elevating our heart. Could be strength training, could be playing a sport. The important thing is that you're getting that activity. Am I exercising with enough intensity? You can use the talk test. So we definitely want to make sure that we're getting our heart rate elevated enough to get that cardiovascular benefit. So by using the talk test, we can determine if we're exercising with enough intensity. So if you find yourself being able to talk in full sentences when you're exercising, you're probably not exercising with enough intensity. So increasing the intensity to the point at which you would find it difficult to talk in full sentences, that's at a better intensity level to get the maximum benefit from your cardiovascular exercise. So it's reasonable actually to expect as much as a 10% drop in blood pressure with regular physical activity. And when you couple this with healthy changes you're making to the diet, adopting more DASH diet style foods, you can really begin to see those improvements in blood pressure. So certainly, diet is a huge influence on blood pressure, as is exercise. But let's touch on some other factors that influence blood pressure as well. So stress can certainly have a big impact on blood pressure, especially if it's not controlled over time. Quality of sleep is one of those things that has many downstream impacts on our health and wellness. Certainly, blood pressure is one of them. If we're taking any medications over the counter and prescribed, some of the side effects of those medications can result in higher blood pressure. In our hydration status, if we're borderline dehydrated a good part of most days, that will actually act to elevate our blood pressure. If we're drinking plenty of water, ideally, that keeps our blood more viscous and moves through the blood vessels more easily. All right, so let's do a quick recap. DASH diet, so let's put it all together to make meaningful change. So we touched on, of course, limiting refined foods and the overall sodium intake in the diet. Certainly refined foods contain a lot of sodium, and cutting back or minimizing those refined foods will go a long way in reducing sodium intake. One of the cornerstones of the DASH diet is making sure there's plenty of whole plant foods, certainly fruits and vegetables, aiming for at least 5 servings a day, ideally even more than that, including regular whole grains in the diet. So this could be brown rice, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, oats, for instance, quinoa, all excellent examples of whole grains instead of a more refined white flour type of a grain. We would definitely want to include regular servings of beans, nuts, and seeds. Those are all great sources of vegetable proteins and come packed with the potassium and magnesium and calcium that we need to kind of moderate blood pressure. We should start checking nutrition labels for sodium content. Scrutinizing those labels will certainly help us make better selections with lower sodium content. We should limit saturated fats, and these are coming mainly from the animal sources of food. So choosing more of your chicken or fish over your red meats or processed meats, certainly better options. Managing stress, another great way to improve blood pressure. Get out there and get moving. Look for ways to increase your physical activity. We've seen the impact that exercise does have on blood pressure. If you're using tobacco products, please cut back or try to quit. That will certainly have a big impact on blood pressure. And finally, start small, start somewhere. The important thing is that we're moving in the right direction. We're circling that date on the calendar. Sometimes that's the most important step. The most difficult step to make is beginning. Thank you once again for joining me today for this discussion on blood pressure and the DASH diet. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks again and have a great day.